Friends, in our reading through the Bible in a year, reading sequentially through the different books of the Bible, on each Sunday, we're trying to preach on a different book of the Bible. That helps to move us along, to keep the body going. And we've arrived at the 17th book of the Bible. And the 17th book of the Bible is named, as Ken has already let the cat out of the bag, is named Esther. It's named after the heroine in this book of the Bible. The first book, 5 books are called the Pentateuch, and then there's the histories that are together, and they run with 1st and 2nd Chronicles and Ezra and Nehemiah. And now there's another shelf in the bookshelf of the Bible, the bookcase of the Bible, a whole nother shelf called the Writings. And in the Writings is the book of Psalms and the book of Proverbs and the book of Ecclesiastes, and also this book, the book of Esther. It's not a long book. It's one of the shorter books in the Bible. You could read it easily in one afternoon, probably even in an hour you could read through this book. And it takes place about 470 years before Jesus, and it takes place in the Middle East. Do you remember what was happening 470 years before Jesus? Well, I'm going to tell you. I'm going to remind you, all right? 470 years before Jesus, Israel had gone past the heyday of its kingdom, past the high points of King David and King Solomon, and deteriorated with kings who did not do well, and it ended up being conquered and taken off into exile. Certainly the brightest and best of the people were taken off into exile. And many of them were taken into Persia, what we would call Iran today, because that, at that time, 470 years before Jesus, was the kingdom that had a large empire stretching all the way from Egypt to India, including Israel. They controlled all of the Middle East at that time. And this story, this little drama, takes place in Susa, which is the capital city of the Persian Empire in what we would call Iran. Now, the Jews have been in exile there for nearly 2 centuries. And you know, in 2 centuries, you kind of grow into a place. They hold on to their identity as the Jewish people, but some of them have been born who only know the homeland by being told stories of it. Some of them have gotten married. Some of them have taken jobs. So they've begun to be assimilated into the exile country, though they work at remembering and having an identity and hearing the stories of the people and the place where they used to be. And they still have an identity even in that empire. You can think of groups of folks, even in this country, who hold on to an identity even when they're a part of the citizenship as a whole. They always held on to their identity and their heritage. And this story, the story of Esther, is the story of how a young woman, boys and girls, it's a story of a young woman, a story of how she saved the people. And it was written as a drama, maybe even a melodrama. In Jewish synagogues, they tell this story once a year still. They tell it in an evening and then they retell it the next morning. And when they do, they tell it as a melodrama. And a melodrama is a drama where people are expected to boo and to cheer. Do you remember that? And so I may ask you to boo. If I do like this, that means bring me boos, all right? Particularly, you're going to boo for the villain in this story, whose name is Haman, all right? Let's practice that. Haman. Yeah, that's good. I think you need a clearer signal. We'll go like that. That means boo. And then Haman. I need more boos from here, boys and girls. Haman's the villain in this story. He's the bad guy. Haman. All right. Walked into the room. And then there's a hero, too. And the hero is Uncle Mordecai. Uncle Mordecai. That's it. Uncle Mordecai. Right. That's it. And then Esther. And touch your heart, okay? Because Esther had heart. And then Esther, all right. You don't have to do it every time, but if I call for it, I think it fits in the story at that point, all right? And the story opens in the capital city in the Persian Empire, Susa. And one of the things that they're really good at, the king is really good at, is throwing parties. His name is King Ahasuerus. But I'm just going to shorten that for this telling to King Aha. King Aha all right? King Ahasuerus, we'll call him King Aha, was really good at throwing parties. In fact, everybody in the book of Esther is good at throwing parties. In fact, even though the book of Esther is short, it's one of the shortest books in the Bible, there are more banquets in Esther than there are in any other book in the Bible. They kind of go from one banquet to another banquet to another banquet in this melodrama, all right? And they're having a banquet. Now, this particular banquet was thrown by the king, and it's been going on for a semester. The king and all of his best friends, his counselors and his courtiers, they've been having this party. And the text, you'll hear it in a minute, the text says the wine was flowing freely, all right? So this is a semester-long party. Anybody here ever partied for an entire semester? You indict yourselves. Maybe you knew somebody, all right? Because they've been partying for an entire semester here. The king threw this party for 180 days for his best friends in the palace. And at the end of it, he decreed everybody in the city, the capital city, should share in the party for the last week. So this takes place on the last day of a 7-day party after the 180-day party. And the king, on the last day, when he had been drinking all week and all semester before that, he said, King Aha said, I have an idea. Maybe not, huh? Your best ideas may not come at the end of a 7-day binge. Remember that. The king said, I have an idea. Let's have Queen Vashti come in to all of my friends here at the party and show off her beauty by wearing her crown. And he sent the courtiers to summon her. And Queen Vashti had left the party about 2 months earlier. She had left and invited all the ladies to come with her. They were done with that. And when the courtiers came in and said, Queen Vashti, the king says, you're commanded to come into the party and to wear your crown, she said, I'm not going. I'm done with those guys. You go back and tell the king that I said no. And that's where the story begins. I'll read the text here in the first chapter, just 12 verses of it, to give you a sense of the flavor. This happened in the days of Ahasuerus, the same Ahasuerus who ruled over 127 provinces, from India to Cush. In those days, when King Ahasuerus sat on his royal throne in the citadel of Susa, in the 3rd year of his reign, he gave a banquet for all his officials and ministers, the armies of Persia and Media. The nobles and the governors of the provinces were present. While he displayed the great wealth of his kingdom and the splendor and pomp of his majesty for many days, 180 days in all. When these days were completed, the king gave for all the people present in the citadel of Susa, both great and small, a banquet lasting for 7 days in the court of the garden of the king's palace. There were white cotton curtains and blue hangings tied with cords of fine linen and purple and silver rings and marble pillars. There were couches of gold and silver on a mosaic pavement of porphyry and marble and mother of pearl and colored stones. Drinks were served in golden goblets, goblets of different kinds, and the royal wine was lavished according to the bounty of the king. Drinking was by ordinance without restraint. For the king had given orders to all the officials of his palace to do as each one desired. Furthermore, Queen Vashti gave a banquet for the women in the palace of King Ahasuerus. On the 7th day, when the king was merry with wine, he commanded Mehumah, Biztha, Harbana, Bigtha, Abagtha, Zethzar, and Carcass, the 7 eunuchs who attended him, to bring Queen Vashti before the king wearing the royal crown in order to show the peoples and the officials her beauty, for she was fair to behold. But Queen Vashti refused to come at the king's command conveyed by the eunuchs. At this, the king was enraged, and his anger burned within him. You don't want to make King Aha mad. King Aha was really mad. King Aha was so mad he didn't know what to do. So he said to his courtiers, what do we do? And they said to him, You know, this is a problem, King, because it's not just about you and Queen Vashti, but if word of this gets out, that you told her to do something and she just said no, all of the wives in the kingdom, in fact, all of the women in the kingdom are going to start doing the same thing. None of us will be able to tell them what to do anymore. You need to take care of this right now. And so King Ahaz said, okay, I will. The royal edict is that Vashti is no longer queen. We'll have a contest, a competition to choose a new queen. Let the decree go forth. It doesn't say what Vashti thought about that, but I'm thinking she may have thought, good, I was tired of the job anyhow, right? They had a new competition now. And one of the people who was a contestant by the station she held was the young woman, Esther, who also was beautiful. Esther was Jewish, and like many of the Jewish people, she didn't carry that identity out front because there was some concern that she'd be mistreated. She also was an orphan, and she had been adopted and cared for by her uncle, her good uncle Mordecai. Mordecai, he was more of a cousin than an uncle, but he had done the right thing and been a good man to her, kind of a father figure. And Mordecai would sit by the city gates every day and every night. You know, you sit by the city gates, you learn things, you hear things. It was kind of like hanging out by the courthouse door. And he learned stuff there. Esther said to the person in charge of the competition, what is it I should do that might set me a step above? The Bible doesn't tell us what the competition leader told her, but it says she was smart enough to ask. So she didn't just rely on her looks. She asked what she should do to win. She was smart. She wasn't only pretty. And she was chosen as the new queen. And her uncle, Uncle Mordecai, he was beaming with pride sitting by the city gates. And while he was there one day, he heard of a plot to kill King Ahaz. And he went and told Esther, and she told King Ahaz, and he was very grateful to hear of the plot, and he had the plotters arrested and extracted and exterminated. And he had written in the chronicles of the king's history, thanks to Mordecai for putting it into that plot. Well, the story goes on. And the story says that the king had a chief counselor, a chief lieutenant, whose name was Haman. Haman had a big ego. Haman's ego was so big that he thought people should bow down not only to the king, but they should also bow down to him, Haman, whenever he walked by. And you know, there was one person who was not going to bow down to Haman, and that was Uncle Mordecai. He was a Jew who believed that there was one God, the living God, and he would not bow to anyone other than God. And that made Haman furious. So Haman thought, and he went into King Ahaz and he said, I'd like an edict, king. I advise you to give an edict that lets me put to death anyone who will not do homage to you or to your assistants or to their families as well, to put them all to death. And the king said, well, I don't know. And Haman said, now I'll give you $10,000 if you'll do it. And King Ahaz thought, okay, that's a good idea. And he did it. He gave Haman that power. And when Uncle Mordecai heard of it, he was worried to death. And Esther was worried to death because they were Jewish. King Ahaz just didn't know it. And Uncle Mordecai went and met privately with Queen Esther, and he said, Esther, you've got to put a stop to this. And Esther said, you know what Esther said, boys and girls? She said, I'm afraid that if I tell the king I'm Jewish too, he won't like me anymore. It's hard to tell the truth when you're afraid, isn't it? It's hard sometimes. Uncle Mordecai said to her, Esther, I know you're afraid, but you have to tell the truth. We have to tell the truth even when we're afraid. Don't think you can hide from the truth. You have to tell it, Esther, and trust that God will provide for you. But Esther was smart, and she said, you know, I'm going to find the right time and the right moment. I think I'll throw a party. She knew the king was big on parties. And so she said, I'm going to throw a party there's just one more party of King Ahaz left, and I'll throw my party right after that one. She sent out the invitations. I'm going to tell him at the party because he's usually in a good mood about halfway through a party. Well, at the party the night before, King Ahaz's last party, King Ahaz, who hadn't been sleeping well, said, "Somebody read me the minutes of the last meeting. That always helps me sleep." And when they read the minutes, it said, and Mordecai did a good thing by revealing a plot, and King Ahaz said, "Oh, we never honored him for that." So at his party, he said to Haman, who was there, "Haman, what should be done to somebody who does the king a great service?" And Haman, who just thought anytime the king said something about doing something for somebody, he was probably talking about Haman. Haman said, "Well, that person should be put on a royal horse and carried through the city with a herald declaring to everyone how wonderful they are." And so King Ahaz said, "Haman, that's what I want you to do to Mordecai." And Haman was disgusted. "I've got to carry that guy around the city on a horse?" And he did. And that just made him all the more angrier at Mordecai. He was determined to carry out his plot to kill all of them. And so, what did he do? He waited for his moment. He went ahead and put his plans in place. But Esther's party was the next night. And Esther, when she thought the moment was right, she turned to the king and she said, "King Ahaz, someone has a plot to kill me and my people. I'm Jewish, and they have a plot to kill all of us who are Jews." And King Ahaz, who was awfully fond of Esther, King Ahaz said, "Who would do such a thing?" And Esther, because she had heart, even though she was afraid, she looked at Haman and she said, "It's Haman." And King Ahaz got so mad, so angry, he had to walk out of the room. Have you ever been so mad you had to walk out of a room? And when he walked out of the room for a minute, Haman, because he knew his time was up, he threw himself grabbing onto Esther's legs, and he said, please, Esther," as he was hugging her, "please don't let the king do anything bad to me." And just then, King Ahaz walked back into the room, and he saw Haman grabbing Esther's legs, and what do you think he thought? Yeah. It didn't look very good from his perspective. So he immediately said, "Guards, out with Haman, out of the room, extricate him," and off with his head. Yeah, well, that's what happened to Haman. And because Esther, she had heart, because she was brave enough to speak the truth, she served as queen for a long, long time. And her uncle, Mordecai, he sat by the gates and greeted everybody and said, "Do you know that Queen Esther is my niece?" He enjoyed being the counselor for a long time. Now, here's the moral of the story, the end. If the band's going to come back up, this is probably a good moment, fellas. Here's the moral of the story, because every good story's got a moral. Always speak the truth. Sometimes it's hard, but always speak the truth, even when telling the truth is scary. Now, here's the moral of the story, because every good story's got a moral. Timing is everything. Timing is everything. Wait for the right moment. Be patient and ask God to show you when to speak and when to keep silent. Now, here's the moral of the story, because every good story's got a moral. God can work through everyone. God can work through girls and boys. God works through people who have heart. God can work through people no matter if they're as old as Mordecai or as young as Esther. You can be a hero for God and bless God's people no matter who you are. God gives you heart. So speak your truth, trust God, watch for the right time, and act with bravery. And remember Esther, who God put in the right place at just the right time. Amen.